So again, I want to remind you that you have access to my slides on Canvas should you want them. I would discourage you from using those as a crutch, where that's all the notes, all the notes that you're relying upon. So if you are pulling up my slides, I would encourage you to be writing some things in the slide itself or in the presenter notes or taking some notes on another document, whether it's physical paper or on your computer screen, just so that way you can fill in some of the gaps. I'm going to trust as juniors and seniors that you all can advocate for yourselves and take notes that will be meaningful to you. Holly? We will be taking a quiz over Chapter 3 at the end of Chapter 3, yes. And then our test will cover Chapters 1 through 3, and I may pull in a few items from Chapter 4, but we'll see kind of how quickly we run through Chapter 3 and if we're able to cover anything for Chapter 4. So we are doing unit tests as opposed to chapter tests. Matt? Yes, tests will be on Canvas as well. Yeah. A lot of what I do is on Canvas. So having your computer here every day is pretty important. Not singling anybody out, but okay. Let's talk about our Constitution and some of the basic principles that exist within our Constitution as we begin. So as you are getting this in your notes, and just as you're thinking here, just brainstorm a little bit. What are some constitutional principles that you've heard in the past or you are familiar with? Just shout them out. You can think of a basic principle. It doesn't have to be something that you know or think is going to show up on my screen. If you have my slides, don't cheat and jump ahead on the next slide. But just off the top of your head, what's a constitutional principle?
Freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech, yeah, that's one of them. Good, what else?
Right to assemble.
Right to assemble, what? The Bill of Rights. Yes, those are constitutional principles. Lots of stuff in there.
Bear arms.
The right to bear arms. Okay. What else is a constitutional principle?
Jury. Right to
Okay.
fair and speedy.
Okay, fair and speedy trial, right to jury. We are really good and familiar with the Bill of Rights. First 10 amendments to the Constitution. Where else can we find stuff?
Habeas corpus.
Habeas corpus. Good. Okay. What else? How about limited? Oh, ex post facto. Good. That's another very obscure one that a lot of people don't know about. Popular sovereignty, limited government. All of those things are part of it. Checks and balances, constitutional principles. So we're going to talk about some basic principles, things that help us understand what our Constitution is all about. We'll get to a lot of those things throughout the course of the semester. We may not get there necessarily in this chapter. But when we look at the relevance of our Constitution, it still is important and it still is current, even though it was written over 200 years ago. And it remains as the basis of our government today. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, the United States is pretty young when we look at world superpowers. We have not been in existence for that many years when we compare ourselves with a nation like Greece. However, we do have one of the longer standing governments, especially republics or democratic republics. We have one of the longest standing constitutions of the current governments. Because when we look historically, most constitutions don't last all that long. Eventually they fall apart at some point, which can be a little unnerving when we think about our nation's future. But we are trusting that God has a bigger and better plan, and He knows that, and I pray that my children live out to see the Constitution still in its entirety. We'll see what happens. So it is the foundation of our American society, and it provides the basic principles for our social system and how our government is structured and how our society works. If we neglect the Constitution or if it crumbles and falls apart, then our society is going to dramatically change from what we know it today. It's very concise. The Constitution only has 7,000 words in it. I have not actually counted. I'm trusting the statistics of somebody else. It's probably they've rounded it to the nearest thousandth, I would assume. I'm sure you could Google that and find out exactly how many words there are. Somebody could copy and paste it into a document and find out. I have not done that, I'll confess. But 7,000 words is not all that long when you're talking about a major historical document like this. However, if you are writing a term paper, 7,000 words is probably a little bit more lengthy. So when I was working through my master's and having to write papers last year, I had a class that they required a 3,500 to 5,500 page every week. And I looked at that class and I thought, I don't think so. I don't think that's going to happen. I'm teaching. I don't know how that's going to happen. Those of you that know me well enough know that I can be a little wordy and I can tend to talk. And I would find myself on a Saturday afternoon sitting at Starbucks, or sometimes it was a Thursday night, and I would sit there, sentence one of however many sentences of my 5,000 word paper or 5,000 word paper. Sentence one, nothing. Yeah, getting started is the hardest thing. Once I got started and I figured out what I wanted to do, I would get to my max of 5,500 and I would still have 3 points or 2 points left to go, and I got to fit this in somehow. It's too important to leave out. I don't know that I ever came close to the minimum on some of those papers I had to write. It was usually the maximum by the time I got going. My wife would shake her head and go, why? Just why are you doing that? Why are you making yourself more work? But I look at the Constitution and how it's structured, how it's written, and it amazes me how much information they're able to get into 7,000 words. And so as you begin reading through your Constitution and studying it in preparation for your Constitution project, 7,000 words is not going to take you that long to get through. Just a little plug for that project. I'm not assigning any homework this weekend other than begin working on your Constitution reading project. So instead of reading through chapter 3 and making that an assignment, I'm not giving you the big idea worksheet as homework. I did put it on Canvas. If you like those and you want to use that to help you study, then you're welcome to have it, but I'm not going to make you turn it in. You're not going to have to fill it out. I want you focusing on the Constitution. However, Chapter 3 explains a lot of the constitutional principles and might help you if you want to go read through that on your own. So that's what's coming up this weekend, just a little sidebar there. So the Constitution as it's structured is very broad. It's very straightforward, pretty simple. I know some of you won't agree with that when you look at some of the words that they use and the phrases that they use. However, considering it is a legal document, it really is pretty much summed up that way. What are the drawbacks to that? To having something so important written out in simple terms. CJ?
You need someone, or you won't necessarily know what the original interpretation of the document was.
Yeah, that's a big drawback, isn't it? Okay, Becky, do you have something to add to that?
I was going to say that for certain situations, you don't have a specific answer and it causes some controversy.
Yeah, doesn't that become difficult? Do you have something you want to add?
Well, leaving it so broad, like there's open for interpretation, so everyone's going to read it and put something different.
You're right. You've all seen some sort of cartoon or some sort of movie or TV show where the kid's in love with this girl and he writes a note but doesn't necessarily put her name on it, and it ends up in the hands of the wrong person, and the wrong person gets the wrong idea, and there's a lot of interpretation going on there. My kids are huge fans of the show Full House. Have any of you ever watched that show? Okay. Throwback to the 90s right there. So my kids really enjoy that show, and there's an episode on there where somebody writes a love note, and it passes along between every character in the show, and they think that somebody in the house is falling for them, and it makes it awkward but funny because they're interpreting it incorrectly. And so that is definitely one of the drawbacks to the way it is structured. So when we come to look at interpretation, there's a couple different ways you can look at the Constitution. So let me set up this scenario for you, and I want you to think through it as we are going to eventually apply it to the Constitution. But let's just say that that Ben is going to have everybody over to his house this weekend, and he invites you over, and I'm going to include myself as if I were a high schooler and play it out like I would have as a high schooler. So if one of my friends was having people over, Ben is hosting a party this weekend, you go to mom and dad and you say, hey, mom and dad, can I go to Ben's house this weekend? He's having a great party for all the cool government kids, and I happen to be one of them. So can I go over there? We're gonna have fun. And mom and dad are going to roll through the questions of, okay, who's going? Parents going to be there. What time are you going to be coming home? All that type of stuff. They're going to roll through all the parent questions. And so you answer those questions, and the agreement is that you're going to go to Ben's house. You are going to hang out with Ben and your friends. You're going to be there until 10 o'clock. And, yeah. Yeah, Ben goes to bed early.
You picked the wrong person.
Run with my example here. All right, so let's just say 10 o'clock, and then you are coming home. That's the information your parents know, and that's the agreement. So you leave for Ben's house. You get there Saturday night. You guys are there for a while, and Ben's party is lame, and it's just not going anywhere. So, yeah, sorry. Maybe it's a different Ben. Maybe not. I don't know. So, you guys are, it's about 9:15, and you guys are kind of getting tired of this. And so somebody comes up with the idea of, hey, let's all go to Meijer, and let's party at Meijer. And we're going to go to Meijer. We're gonna do kart races through just for fun through the aisles of Meijer. Okay, so now you're met with a decision. So mom and dad gave you permission to go to Ben's house, hang out with Ben, and you're gonna leave at 10 o'clock to come home. It is 9:15. You're going to Meijer. You don't know how long these races are gonna last. And you also know that mom and dad don't know that you're planning to go to Meijer. We're going to assume that your cell phone died, or that you can't get a hold of mom and dad. Maybe you tried calling them. But depending upon your parents, I realize we have a lot of different viewpoints from parenting right here, and I'm not going to ask you your personal opinion right now or what your parents would do. But you're met with this decision. Okay, option A. You think, okay, mom and dad told me gave me permission to go to Ben's house. I have to be home by 10. I don't think my parents would approve. They don't know that I'd be going to Meijer, so therefore I am going to opt out, and I'm not going to Meijer because my parents don't know about it. They did not specifically give me permission to go there, and I can't get a hold of them, so I don't know what they'd say, so I'm just going to go home and everybody else goes to Meijer. That's option A. Now I want you to think about option B. Option B, you're thinking in your mind, man, my friends are going to Meijer. That'd be way more fun than Ben's house. And mom and dad did not specifically tell me I cannot go to Meijer. I'm still with Ben. I'm still with my friends. And so I'm still kind of within their guidelines. And as long as I'm home as long as I'm leaving Meijer by 10 o'clock and I can still get home at a good time, then I think my parents would be okay with that.
Yeah, that goes really well.
Okay, so option A, option B. Now, how many of you would lean toward option A if my parents did not specifically give me permission to go to Meijer? I probably would not go to Meijer. Raise your hand. Option A. Knowing you and your parents. Okay? Okay, hands down. How many of you would go option B? They did not specifically forbid me from going to Meyer. I think they'd be okay with it. All right. Okay. Right. I understand. Okay, hands down. So, those of you that were option A that said if mom and dad did not specifically give me permission to go to Meyer, you are interpreting your parents' rules in a strict form. You are a strict constitutionalist. Okay? I am a strict constitutionalist. As far as it goes with rules and with when I was growing up, my parents and I had this understanding that if they did not know where I was, then I better be at home. That they need to know where I was, who I was hanging out with, what time I'd be home. And this was also before cell phones, so I did not have that luxury. So we had the understanding that if plans change, I had to use my friend's phone or their parents' phone, call my parents and say, hey, we are going to Meyer and we are going to shop. So we'd have to call. Now, when we look to the Constitution, there are people that have that viewpoint, and here's how they view the Constitution. They look at those 7,000 words, and they will say, if the Constitution does not specifically give us permission to do something, then we should not do it. That's the strict interpretation of the Constitution. And we have courts on the judicial system. We have judges that are strict constitutionalists. And so it's important when appointing or voting for these people that we know their view on the Constitution because they're going to rule based upon that. And so if they can't find it in the Constitution, or they don't believe that the interpretation of the Constitution specifically gives permission and access to whatever law or rule that is being discussed, then they're going to rule against it or they're going to vote against it every single time. Thomas Jefferson, was that his view on the Constitution? Did he believe that we should say strictly to the letter of the law when it comes to the Constitution? Yeah. That was almost a year ago. Come on, you can't ask me to remember stuff. Yes, he was. Well, but once, okay, he argued, yeah, but we also need to think about the fact that he ended up embracing the Constitution. He became president, was vice president first, then became president. So what was he? Did he have a strict view on it, or did he have a loose interpretation? We're going to come back and I want to answer that in a minute. Now, loose constitutionalist is going to interpret the Constitution the way that those of you in Group B would have interpreted your parents' rules. That if mom and dad did not specifically forbid me from going to Meyer, as long as I'm still with Ben, as long as I'm home on time, then they'd probably be okay with it. So you are going to take your parents' permission and interpret that very loose and broadly. People do that with the Constitution, where they will take on the mentality of if the Constitution does not specifically forbid us from creating this law, then it must be okay. And we're good to go. TJ?
But, like, it's not all that black and white. So, is there, like, if it's something where it, like, it mentions it, but it doesn't say exactly, would that still fall under loose, or would that fall under strict? Or would there be another third?
Depends on how strict or how loose you are. So this is where Thomas Jefferson falls in. Okay, so was it Becca brought up Louisiana Purchase? Okay, so remind me what happened with the Louisiana Purchase, Thomas Jefferson. Before the Louisiana Purchase presented itself, what did Jefferson think about the Constitution? Well, not entirely.
Like the president has to follow what the Constitution.
President has to follow what the Constitution states. Because of all the arguing over it, he was a very strict letter of the law, strict constitutionalist. Then Louisiana Purchase came across his desk, and the opportunity was presented. Hey, we could buy this land and more than double the size of our nation. Where's that found in the Constitution? It's not. That is not one of the powers given to the president to purchase land or negotiate there. So he is left with this major dilemma. Do I hold to my principles as a strict constitutionalist, or do I make an exception for what I know is better for the country? Who's Thomas Jefferson's number one rival? Hamilton, right? Alexander Hamilton was a very loose constitutionalist because, remember, his big claim to fame early in the government, what did he set up? National bank system, right? And our national treasury. Is that found in the Constitution? No. Spoiler alert for those of you who have not read it. It's not in there. So he was a very loose constitutionalist. Guess what happens when the debate comes over Louisiana Purchase? Alexander Hamilton all of a sudden becomes a strict constitutionalist. He says, whoa, wait a second, president can't do that. Just because he didn't like Alexander Hamilton. Didn't like Thomas Jefferson. They flip-flop positions based on the situation. So, bring it up to modern day. TJ asked the question, well, is there any middle ground? Is there any moderate view? Yes, there is. So, it's like almost like a color spectrum or a timeline of sorts. You have the real strict people down here. You've got the real loose people down here. You got people that are kind of in the middle. But it opens to broad interpretation and lots of debate and lots of argument over that. So, once again, let me put a plug in for elections and voting. Besides just who has the best commercials or who has the best logo, what do we need to look for when we are voting for somebody? Well, here's one option that you want to investigate. How does that candidate interpret the Constitution? Do they interpret it very loose or very broad? Or are they kind of somewhere in between, and it depends on the situation? So becoming an informed voter means understanding some of these ideas right here. So as we begin to break down the Constitution and begin to look at the outline of it, it really has a pretty nice flowing outline that helps us to be able to organize it well. It begins with the preamble, which of course we discussed last week a little bit, and we talked about the fact that it's the purpose statement. What did you say? Oh yeah, I know. We just didn't get a chance to do that.
No,
You all can check out that on your own. Yeah, well, maybe at some point.
All right.
Yeah. Article 1 deals with the legislative branch. So as you begin reading, hopefully this weekend, through the Constitution, Article 1 is entirely dedicated toward our legislative system. Now, who makes up the legislative branch in our government? It is Congress. Okay? Now, if you are not familiar with this or you don't know how our government works, you need to make sure that you distinguish between Congress and the House and Senate. So, Congress is the general term for our lawmakers. It combines both the House and Senate as part of Congress. So we have two houses of Congress. We have a House of Representatives and we have a Senate. Part of the Connecticut Compromise dictated that. So in our Senate, based on the Connecticut Compromise, how are people represented? 2 per state. Equally, everybody has the same number of senators, no matter how big or how small you are. Equal representation in the Senate. How about the House of Representatives? Based on population. So the bigger the populated state, the more representatives you have. Which is the largest state? By population. California. So California has the most representatives.
We have 11.
I believe you're right. I believe we have 11.
So they have 27.
They have 55, I think it is. So that changes when we do a new census. They will redistribute the number of representatives that we have. Senators never change. So in the Congress, how many senators do we have total? 100, because we have 2 senators for every state. We have 50 states. In the House of Representatives, we have a lot, higher than 300, higher than 400, lower than 500.
480.
435.
Oh.
Somebody say that?
Yeah.
Nice. Very nice.
All right.
So 435 in the House of Representatives. I don't remember if if you're going to see that here or that's somewhere else, but it would be helpful for you to know that it's 435 in the House. There's 100 in the Senate, which gives you a grand total of how many people total in Congress. Yeah, I didn't know you have to do math in government. But math is everywhere. Little plug for my wife's class. I don't know that she puts plugs in for my government class, but I'll do it for her math class. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Now let's talk executive branch. The executive branch is made up of what position? Presidency. Yep. His cabinet would fall into that, you're correct. But the cabinet does not have any powers that are not authorized through the presidency. So the executive branch, as we talked about last week, their role is to enforce the laws. There's a lot of interpretation there as well, based on whether that person is a strict interpreter of the Constitution or a loose interpreter of the Constitution. Article 3 handles the judicial branch. So what entity interprets our laws here in the judicial branch? What organization is responsible for this? It is the Supreme Court. It's the highest law of the land, highest court in the land. By the way, did you know that there's actually a highest court in the land?
Isn't there a court on top of it?
There's a basketball court on top of the Supreme Court.
Wow.
One of my life goals is to get up there and to shoot hoops on that basketball court. But
There actually is one.
yeah, so that justices, which most of them are kind of older, or lawyers can go up there and shoot when they need to exercise.
Somebody just decided.
Now, I've not actually seen that, so if I've been misinformed, I'm going to be very disappointed. But that's one of my goals. I'd love to see that. I know. Maybe we'll have to. Article 4. Oh, by the way, judicial branch. How many members are on the court? On the Supreme Court?
No. 27.
9. 9. Did you? I thought I heard 7. Okay, so there are 9 members in the Supreme Court. Has it always been that way? No. What does the Constitution say about how many members are on the court? It says nothing. You're right. It does not specify how many are on there. So that's what gave Franklin Roosevelt the ability to try to stack and use his court packing scheme in the 1930s to rule in his favor. He wanted to try to add, was it 12? 12 guys onto the court that would increase the court at that point. So yeah, that would have been a mess. So it's probably a good thing it didn't happen. So our judicial branch today, we have 9. There's nothing constitutionally that says we have to have 9. We could go with 7. We could go with 5. We could go with 3. But traditionally, we have accepted 9 as the best number for that. We always want to have an odd number for obvious reasons there to break a tie. Relations among the states is article number 4. You'll notice as you read, a good chunk of the Constitution exists in Articles 1, 2, and 3, and then we get past that, it becomes a lot quicker reading and a lot shorter sections. But it talks about how the states are to relate to one another as they were merging from the Articles of Confederation into this new Constitution. Then we have Article 5, tells us how we are allowed to amend the Constitution. You can never take something out. You must always subtract by addition. So you have to add a new amendment in order to nullify something else that was in the Constitution. Can you give me an example of that? 3/5 compromise and prohibition. Those are the 2 that came to my mind as well. Both of which were nullified by another amendment onto the Constitution. We'll break those down a little bit more later on. And then Article 6 talks about 3 key issues here. National debts was a big deal when the Constitution was written because many of the individual states had a lot of debt left over from the Revolutionary War. And many states had a lot of debt. Other states had very little debt, depending upon how involved they were in that war. And so they came to the agreement that the entire nation would assume that debt and they would put it all together so all the states were on equal playing fields, and that as a nation they would work to pay that off. Our national debt today is astronomical. Then the Supremacy Clause. This states that the Constitution is a supreme law of the land, that no law, no government agency, that nothing can ever supersede the Constitution. So that is part of what gives the judicial system their ability to review laws and make sure they're constitutional. We'll come back to that and we'll talk about that as we get deeper later on. The Supremacy Clause? Supremacy Clause is the supreme law of the land. It says the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and that no law or agency or anything can ever be greater than the Constitution. It must all fall underneath that clause. Then we have the oath of office. This is simply just, this is the presidential oath of office. There are specific words in there that he's supposed to say. And back in 2008, was it 2009 when he actually took office? Anyway, Obama's first term, he misquoted the oath of office. And so you can go back, you can watch YouTube videos on this, and it was not his fault. It was actually Chief Justice John Roberts misspoke when he was reading the oath of office, and you could tell Obama caught it, but he wasn't entirely sure, and he didn't want to cause a controversy or look foolish when he said something different than what was just repeated to him. And so he said it the way that John Roberts told him, and then come to find out the next day, I think it was his chief of staff said, hey, you didn't say it the way the Constitution said, so some people are questioning your presidency already. You need to redo this thing. And so they did a private swearing-in ceremony. They brought in Chief Justice John Roberts again into the White House, and they did it the next day just to be sure. Now, nobody's ever come back and said, well, he shouldn't have been president. No. It's a matter of a mistake. But what a way to start your presidency that way with misquoting that. Now, let's look at article number 7. This talks about ratification. So the ratification is the process by which they were going to approve this Constitution as the new law of the land. We had to have how many states agree to this? 9 out of the 13. Correct. And the only way to change it, once it was ratified by those 9, was by an amendment. And currently we have 27. We've had many, many more that have been proposed, but not approved. So we'll see whether that happens in your lifetime, in my lifetime, or yours.